go.
This is not my gospel that builds these walls between us, drawing borders that separate, raising flags of supremacy, empires of hate in the name of freedom. This is not my gospel that casts the immigrant out, pulling mothers' urgent hands from the cries of their children, expelling souls to isolation because of the color of their skin, their sexuality, the gender, the class, the nation they live in. This is not my gospel that spits on the face of God, lashing his image with words of rejection, warmongering, dominating the weak, diminishing salvation to a conditional thing, while hope lies lost and bleeding, weeping for relief. This is not my gospel that turns communities inwards, planting distrust in their hearts towards the beauty of difference, labeling neighbors as enemies and defining us by division. This is not my gospel with its eyes full of pride, when injustice is clothed in lies, when grace is caged, we face the great divide, humanity displaced from love. My gospel is love, who crossed the chasm between heaven and earth, speaking worth to all in endless benevolence. Love who sat in the dirt with the rejected, erasing their shame with the touch of acceptance, who reached for those society deserted, embracing the leper, the filthy, the hurting. Love who clutched the souls of his rivals in nail-pierced hands, holding them free from hell's vicious venom, declaring them brother, sister, cherished, forgiven. Love who tore the temple veil, divine grasping flesh, flesh clutching divine, crying, you are mine, precious mankind, awake from your slumber and open your eyes to love. Who walked through the walls, crossing divide with burning passion, calling for those who have lost their place, breaking tomb after tomb after tomb to reveal a world of eternal embrace. This is my gospel. This is the cry heard in the night of unrest, clutched close to heartbroken chests, crying, reach for me, reach past the borders, reach to the wounds that have torn us apart, plant seeds of compassion where malice has grown, throw your arms open and welcome the forsaken home. Break down the walls that hate has raised. Turn your eyes to the face of the shamed and realize that it is mine. It is yours. We are one, reborn and remade. Let the stars fall. Let mercy cascade. Let the heavens pour. I gave you my all. I will give it again and again and again. I throw down my kingship. I throw down my fame. To be with you in the rejection, to hold you in the pain. You are not the outsider, nor a child of shame. Let the depths proclaim to the heights above that you are loved.
All right, welcome everybody to our Spring Surge series, and today we have a special guest. His name is Javon Johnson, and Javon Johnson, I met him 19 years ago. He was at Cascade College, baptized him, and at the time, Leah had studied with him, who he was dating, now his wife. But Javon and Leah were in my classes, and great students. And he was raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, went to high school in Las Vegas, Nevada. He enlisted in the United States Navy from December 2008 to December 2012, received a bachelor's degree in youth ministry from Cascade College in 2005. After going into the Navy, he pursued his Master of Divinity at Azusa Pacific University, graduating in 2016. During that time, He was a full-time youth minister at the North County Church of Christ in Escondido, California. And he is a rabid 49ers fan.
Let's go. Let's go, Niners. Let's go.
But he received a commission from the Navy as an ensign in June 2015, and is currently active duty as a chaplain in the United States Navy in Yusko, Japan, right?
Yokosuka. It's all good. Trust me. It looks like Yokosuka, but they say Yokosuka.
Yokosuka.
Yes.
And I've known Javon for a long time, and he's been a good friend in many, many ways. But one of the things that I know we've had, there's been a lot of discussions on social media, and I've had discussions on Black Lives Matter and so forth. And he's been a great friend and a great help and a great person to give feedback and reflection on. He's also posted some very, very powerful personal testimonies. And I'm just really, when we were talking at Kairos church planning about, what's been going on in our country, I thought we need to have a session with Javon. And so Javon's our guest for today, and this is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube. And Javon, welcome to our Zoom session.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And so I'm hoping that I will be able to answer any questions or just be able to shed some light on some things, because I think there's a lot of miscommunication and a lot of lack of understanding just in our country in general. And hopefully come at it from, I'm nervous. I'm a little nervous about it because I want to be able to not just share what I think or what my opinions are, but just to educate and hopefully give people some ideas moving forward as how they can help bridge the gap between Christianity and the Black community, which right now is hurting. And so with Christianity, we're supposed to use Christianity to help the hurting. And I fully believe that we have an opportunity, a huge opportunity to do that. And people who don't have the same color, have a great opportunity to use the gospel to bridge that gap in a tremendous way. And so hopefully I can help you guys. Hopefully I don't waste your time and everything's good.
No problem. It's going to be great. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you a couple questions. You're just going to be able to freely talk. We can engage. We've asked everyone if they would to mute their microphones. If you want to mute your video as well, that's fine. Hey, Leah, the other Leah.
Oh, did she get in? My wife was just saying that she couldn't get in, but I think she figured it out. Did she figure it out?
We got her in. She's in.
Okay.
Turned out I needed to update my Zoom. That's all.
Okay, perfect.
So we're going to do, Javon will do a couple questions, and then we're going to have a question answer for all of you if you're willing to. And so we're glad to have that. But first of all, Javon, first question I want to ask is, in light of everything that's going on, what can we as Christian leaders do? I mean, I don't want to name any, do about this or about this. I mean, with what everything's going on, what can we do? That's the biggest question I get. What do I do?
So I think, to be honest with you, one of the things that when you ask that question, you have to understand that it's not a one-stop shop or a checklist of things that need to happen. Because to be honest with you, most of this stuff is very, it's part of our history, right? And so you have to fundamentally change a lot of things about your mindset and how you view things, right? And so I always say this. I know for a fact that I have biases, right? So if I go on an airplane, I'm gonna be honest and open right now. I go on an airplane, I see two dudes talking Arabic, looking like Muslims. I'm gonna pay attention to them, right? Am I right? I mean, that's what I'm gonna do. And so by default, I already have this bias in my head because of what happened at 9/11, because of what happened with the military, because of what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan and all that stuff. I already have this bias set in. And I think I don't want people to think that it's a one-stop shop. Oh, this is what we can do. Like, you can do certain things, but it has to start from the beginning. And so first of all, recognizing your biases, but also being okay with that. I hope that makes sense to everyone, that you have to be okay that you have biases. Now, once you recognize that, doesn't mean you treat people awfully, right? So I recognize my bias on with Muslims, but that doesn't mean I go off and say they're terrorists or they're awful people or all Muslims are this or this is this. And so now I have to say, okay, what can I do in my head to make sure that I delete those biases some way in shape or form? And so I think the next step after recognizing your bias is to be present with or to understand them. So to be honest with you, I still have that bias towards Muslims because I don't have that many Muslim friends, to be honest with you. I don't have that many Muslim people that I communicate with, that I'm with. And I think that's what needs to happen, not just in the Christian world, but mostly the Christian and the white community, is like recognize that you have some kind of bias. It might not be, it's not racist, but Black people, unfortunately, sometimes can take that as being racist because you have a bias. It's okay. Like, you have a bias, I get it. More often than not, you probably didn't grow up around certain people. Some people have different experiences. I'm not saying all people grew up in a mostly white neighborhood if they're white, or a mostly Black neighborhood if they're Black. But more often than not, we hang around people that look like us. And I see that all the time in the military, right? People hanging around people, like when you go and join the military for the first time, and even though it's very diverse, people hang around people that look like them, and they talk to people that look like them, whether it be tall, skinny, wealthy, whatever. And so I think you have to recognize that we do have biases. So, and then now, since we have that bias, how do we put ourselves in a position to say, all right, I'm going to go and talk to people. And when I talk to them, even if my biases are correct, even if after I talk to them, I'm like, wow, that was an interesting conversation with that person. Now you got to seek to understand why they have that particular bias, that particular thought process. So I have a friend who, and I'm going to explain it to you. So if you met her, you'd be like, wow, she's racist towards white people. And I had posted a thing about a minister when Martin Luther King decided to write the letter to the pastors in the Birmingham jail. One of the ministers came out and he got himself killed for the cause. Well, I posted that on my feed, and this lady who's Black, she's like, why are you posting that white man? This is Black History Month. Why are you posting him? They got this, they got that. You supposed to be posting nothing but Black people, right? So when you hear that, you thinking, whoa, that's crazy. But you got to understand that she's coming from it from a different perspective, a perspective that you don't have, a perspective that has told her from history and her parents, her grandparents saying, hey, we've been treated and marginalized this way. White people treat me this way, blah, blah, blah. Why, like, we don't have nothing. Why are you doing this to everybody's at a different level? And so I think that when you meet Black people like that, or you meet people like that who have these extreme viewpoints, you have to be like, all right, cool. I understand where you're coming from. Or if I don't understand where you're coming from, help me to understand where you're coming from, because your viewpoint is kind of out of whack. But I think what happens is that we end up dismissing them, or saying, oh, that's how some Black people think. And then because like people like me don't think like that, you're like, oh, well, you're not like that. You don't think that way. I'm like, in some ways I do. I just don't express it that way because I still have that emotion attached to it. And so I think understanding your biases, seeking to understand, and then once you seek to understand, now you have to be like, all right, now I can stand with. I think one of the problems with Christianity, we're always trying to plug our opinion into it or the gospel into it without any equity or clout. No, you don't have any equity or clout with the people that you're trying to bring the gospel to. And so when you say the gospel, it falls on deaf ears because they're like, okay, well, where were you? Who are you? You don't look like me. You don't act like me. And you don't know anything about why I think the way I think. And so I think that that's super important for us to understand. So once you get past all of that, once you get to that point, I think also too, you need to, we as people need to educate ourselves on some of the fundamental problems with our whole system. And I don't know, Ron, people aren't allowed to, people can unmute themselves. because I have a question that I want to ask people before I go into the next part.
Sure, they can unmute themselves. That's
okay. So I want to know if anyone knows what the 3/5 compromise is. Does anyone know what that is? Anybody can say. If you don't know,
a historical thing, right?
yes.
Wasn't it, something about 3/5 of a person
Right.
in the Constitution? I don't know. That's
No,
all.
yeah, you close. Yeah, that's good. Anybody got anything else? Yeah, no, that's what it's
was it
talking
Missouri?
about, yeah.
Was it that in those states that it was a compromise of border states? Is that right? And so it was a way of getting some voting power, but not fully acknowledge the humanity of
Yes.
Is it how slaves were counted?
Yes, all of that. Everything that you guys said is all of that. Now, I want you to understand that was written in the Constitution of the United States of America. I want us to understand that. So when we as Black people, so it's not just that. I'm gonna keep going because I want us to understand that this stuff is systematic. It's not just simply we're like, oh, that stuff happened a long time ago, or only the South was kind of racist, or only this. Like, it's a lot of history building up, coming up to where we get to 2020, where someone like me is like, man, we still dealing with this stuff. We still going with some of this craziness that's happening in our world. I thought we was good after the civil rights movement, and I thought we was good after everything. So the 3/5 compromise, what everybody said, right, is that the South had a lot of slaves. They wanted to, but if they didn't count the slaves, they wouldn't have more representatives in Congress, and they would get taxed a certain way. And so they said, hey, we're gonna make sure that Black people are worth 3/5 because they didn't think that they were worth anything, but they needed to get their representation. I have another question. Does anybody know what Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court decision of Plessy versus Ferguson? Anybody know anything about that?
I'm going to take a stab at it and say it was set to separate but equal.
Oh, yeah, you right on point.
Mm-hmm.
You're right on point. And what it did is it said that basically the South was doing the separate but equal laws or whatever, and then the Supreme Court of the United States of America said that was constitutional. The Supreme Court. So this idea that somehow it was just the South or just certain people, whatever, this whole country was like that. And so what I don't want to have happen, right? I don't want people to hear this stuff as I keep going and be like, oh no, now I have white guilt. Oh, it's so bad. No, it's just that's where we're coming from. We're coming from all of this stuff that continuously has happened throughout the history of this country. And so when we got this situation where it wasn't just the South that decided to do that, it was our Supreme Court at a 7-1 decision. Seven justices to 1 said, yeah, it's constitutional to be separate but equal. It's constitutional to say whites only, colored only. That's what America is. So Black people hear that, they know that, and then you go, and then now you put all of that back into the 60s or whatever. And even before that, does anybody know what the Dred Scott decision was?
Supreme Court ruling around the issue of a free man or free slave having his rights as a free slave denied and legally was taken back into slavery? Yes,
you are on point. Look at you. You can teach this class. So I'm gonna read what it says. In a landmark case, the United States Supreme Court decided 7-2 against Scott, finding that neither he nor any other person of African ancestry could claim citizenship in the United States. Therefore, Scott could not bring a lawsuit against the federal government because he wasn't a citizen. Moreover, Scott's temporary residence outside of Missouri did not bring about the emancipation under the Missouri Compromise, as the court ruled this has to be unconstitutional and properly deprive Scott's slave owner of his legal property. That was a Supreme Court decision. So, and one of the things that I just want everybody to understand that, like, all this stuff has just been like in the system forever. Now I'm gonna fast forward because I want us to understand that when I say those things, like, well, that was a long time ago, or this is this, and you know, the Civil Rights Act was like in 1960, so it wasn't that long ago. My grandma was around. You know, think about this. My grandma was 21 years old before she had the right to vote in this country. My grandma is still alive. That wasn't that long ago. So I don't want us to think that somehow, oh, that stuff was a long time ago. I don't want you to think that. I want you to understand my grandma was 21 years old before she legally had the right to vote in this country. And my grandma is still alive. So this is not that far removed. So we get the remnants of that as I'm 37. We get the remnants of that from our grandparents and that from our parents and say, hey, this is what we experienced. This is what we had. And then you got this systematic, continual racism that has happened to them. And even though the laws have been changed or whatever, it's still to the point where people, they don't trust the system. And I want to read something to you. So another thing. It's the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986. So this wasn't that long ago. I was 3 years old when this was happened. It created a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence for 5 grams, a few ounces of crack cocaine, like a small amount. You get a mandatory minimum of 5 years for having that. However, if you had 100 times more coke that was you can snort it with, you barely got 5 years for that same sentence. So basically, if you sold a little bit of rocks, which more often than not was found in the black neighborhoods and the poorer neighborhoods because it was cheaper, you got 5-year sentence for that. Yet if you were in the wealthier, now I don't want to say white because I want to say wealthier neighborhoods, right, where you had a different type of cocaine, because even Whitney Houston was like, I don't do crack, I do cocaine. Like, it's kind of crazy. You know, she even said that. She's like, wow. You're like, wow, that's the distinction. But like, you can have 100 times more and barely get 5 years. That was purposely discriminatory against Black people and people of color. And that was 1986. And so like this thing is very emotional and very deep rooted within the system of our country. And this idea that somehow, like, and I always say, like, we elected the first Black president, that doesn't change that we never healed from any of this stuff. We never healed from anything. And so people are still upset like it's 1960 for that reason. And so it's not whether or not it's rational or not. It's just like it's more, you have to seek to understand this stuff isn't. It's not about one dude dying. You know, it's not about one person getting killed. It's about continual people getting killed and the continual system being against us. And we had never feeling like we were actually a part of this country, even though we've been as indigenous to this country as the people that brought us here. And so I want to stop there because there's a lot of stuff out there. I want to know if people can maybe ask questions, say comments. I don't know how you want this to work, Ron.
Well, I was going to hold these to the end.
Okay.
So we have so many people on. But I wanted to mention, get your thoughts on this. A few years ago, I was on the, we have Portland Police Department had a chief of police who's African-American, Danielle Outlaw. She's in Philadelphia now. And but when she came here, she helped to create a implicit bias speakers bureau. And so there was a group of us, and I talked about the feedback I got from people at Agape, but we would talk to police regularly about, just some of the experiences. And I listened to so many stories of, people on the group with me, and I just was floored, at just, being pulled over, regularly, being neglected, being watched in a store. And I just, I mean, and when people would say, I don't see that happens, actually, I mean, I can honestly say I knew it, but when I listened to people tell me the story, I was like, this is not fair. This is unjust.
Right.
And I know you've dealt with that as well, with stories like that, and you've been open with people about that. But that shows our biasness, I think, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes, it does. I agree. Yes. So I hope that part of what I was just said answered that first question. What can we do? I think recognize your bias, seeking to understand, being present with, and then educating yourself are the main things that I would say are important to get to a better situation. And it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, it takes years to formulate a new opinion or a new bias or a new whatever it is that you need to get to a better spot. And then also being present with Black people, even in the midst of their hurting. They might say some things that's hurtful. And I'll give you an example real quick. And it has nothing, it was I was in the Navy, I was enlisted, and I preached sometimes at my church. And there's the girl, she was going to work with us in the admin office, and she was gay. She was a Navy woman married to a Marine woman. And I would talk to her all the time. We'd talk, go back and forth and do all that good stuff. And then one day I was like, hey, I'm preaching this Sunday. You want to come? She was like, I don't want to come to your church. Y'all hate gay people. I was like, hold up. I was like, time out. Whoa. I was like, I've been good to you the whole time. She's like, well, not you, but Christians do. They hate gay people. Now I could have been like, oh, I can't believe her. She hates Christians. She's blah, blah, blah. But I was like, I understood her frustration, because more than likely somewhere along the line, some Christian people said something or did something to her that was just unfortunate. And I didn't hold that against her. I was just like, you know what? It's all right. You don't have to come to my sermon. And I think that's how you have to respond as a white person when Black people do respond to you that way. Oh, you white, you don't understand. This. Cops do this, blah, blah, blah. You got to understand that it ain't got nothing to do with you. Don't personalize that. That has to do with years and years and years of oppression, man. Like it's not you. And so you just have to still be present with them even when they're hurting. And I think that's super, super important right there. But I don't know if all of that answers that first question that you posed.
Thank you. So what, just to kind of summarize for our listeners, I'm hearing you say that, we can change our mindset by acknowledging our bias, admitting it, understanding that's in other people, and just listening to stories. Then question number 2, the one we've been getting, what can I as a Christian leader do when I have people in my congregation who think all of this, whether Black Lives Matter, the rioting, police brutality against people of color, racism, we can just go down the line that there are people in our churches who say this is all kind of blown out of proportion. It's not that bad. And here we are as leaders, we acknowledge that we need to do something. What can we do with people in, I don't say with people, but what can we do when we have people in our congregations who feel that's, who don't buy in or don't support this and don't believe it's real? I hope I'm asking this question right.
No, I understand. I think that once you do all the things that I just suggested, right, because that's going to take years to formulate, now you'll be speaking out of your knowledge base. You know how you can, like say for instance, someone asked me something about my 49ers or whatever. I'm going to be speaking out of my knowledge base about my 49ers. You asked me about the Ravens, which my wife likes. I ain't gonna be able to speak out of that. So like I think if you have an opportunity to put yourself in a position to keep learning and keep educating yourself, then when you're confronted with the people who have those kind of biases or those lack of understandings, now you can come at it from your out of your own knowledge base. And I think this is important, right? Because a lot of times ministers, especially white ministers, want to say something, but they don't know what to say. They don't know how to say it. They don't know if they said that the person in their church would be like, I can't believe you said that. You support this, you support that. And you're like, no, it's not that. I'm just trying to help you see a healthier way of viewing the situation. And I think that's the part of it. The other part is being able to help how can I say this? Help them realize, without bringing it up, I know it's hard, that helping the marginalized is a good thing. Does that make sense? That Black people are marginalized. They are the victims. They are the people that of the voices of the unheard. And so you gotta bring the gospel to them the way that it makes sense. So I think I did a sermon on. I'm trying to think. I did the good. It was like the Good Samaritan, but instead of putting the Samaritan in there, I put the good homosexual. And instead of and then I changed it again, and I put the good illegal alien. Then I changed it again, and then I put the good liberal. And I went down, and I took all of those situations and made them understand that that's the situation that they were having with the Samaritans. The Jews they didn't like them. They said they were half-breeds, all this crazy stuff. And that's when Jesus is explaining that story, right? He's explaining it to them like, yeah, out of all those people, the person that you hate the most was the one that was the good person. That you have to allow people to see people as people and not just as, I don't know, like a political thing. I don't know if I'm explaining this right, because I think deep down inside, we want to say the right things and we want to do the right things. But for whatever reason, it's more important that we have an opinion. And when we do that, when you create this us versus them mentality, it's real easy to dismiss the other side. It's really easy to do that. It's really easy to be like, well, those liberals, or those conservatives, or those Antifa members, or those. And I think you have to remind your congregation that we're all humans. And it's so interesting that I say that. I want to read a verse to you. I think I have. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. A verse, because I think when we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be, right? It says, after this, I looked up, and there before me was a great multitude that no one can count, from every nation, tribe, people, language, standing before the throne, before the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and holding palm branches in their hand, and they cried out in one voice, salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. Revelation 7:9-10. And this idea that, like, did you hear all that? Every nation, every tribe, every people, every language, right? Like, you have to remind your congregation that this ain't about your opinion, man. This ain't about you. It ain't about your color. It's about God's holy nation. And when we get to heaven, you do realize Black Lives Matter people going to be up there too if they believe in Jesus Christ. You do realize those liberal people go be up there even if they believe in Jesus Christ. You do realize all the people that you against, supposedly, if they believe in Jesus Christ and they confess with their heart, they get baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, they're going to be in heaven praising God the same way we're praising God. So I think you have to humanize people, humanize them, and say, stop with this us versus them thing. It's our job to go out and show Christian love to people, regardless of what they look like, regardless of how they are. And obviously Jesus does those examples all the time. And I think just reminding them who Jesus is, reminding people how Jesus saw other people, how Jesus viewed other people, how Jesus treated other people who were the outcasts. And I think, bridging that gap is super important. And then the final thing I want to say is important. One of the things that, and I keep bringing up the homosexual thing because I spent a lot of time with certain people and trying to help bridge that gap and saying, hey, we need to talk more to homosexuals and be present with them. And one of the things that I did at my old church is a lot of the teenagers were asking me around the time when they were doing Supreme Court things about homosexual marriage or whatever, how do we, try to be nice to people, yet still be convicted by the gospel that says homosexuality is a sin. And so one of the things that I would suggest pastors do, and what I did, there was this woman named Sally Gary. She was at Pepperdine University, and I had her come to my church, to my retreat, and talk to the kids about homosexuality. And then I had the congregation. Our congregation probably has about 600 people. And I had a thing where I was like, hey, we're going to talk about homosexuality and our Christian response. And she was the guest speaker. And she was able to speak from her experience and how she felt and all that stuff. I was surprised. We had 200 people show up to that thing. I was super surprised that many people showed up. But just the idea of saying, hey, instead of us just assuming things or just speaking out of our opinion or, taking a Bible verse and beating it over people's head, let's talk to somebody who's dealing with this thing and let's understand them, and for overall, it was positive, but I think, you had a few negative people, but I think you get that no matter what. But I think what it did is help people to say, hey, this is how we can maybe bridge the gap into that community without necessarily losing or jeopardizing our Christianity. And I think that's super important for you to get Black leaders or Black people or people who have dealt with certain things in your congregation outside of the sermon, just like on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and sit down and have a conversation with them and understand them and say, hey, we want to bridge this gap. Maybe it's from other, because one of the biggest segregated areas is Sunday morning. Black people go to Black churches, white people go to white churches, Chinese people go to Chinese churches, Mexicans go to Mexican churches. It's super segregated. Yet I don't read that in Revelation chapter 7. I see heaven being unsegregated. So you got to desegregate your people and putting them in opportunities to be around people who don't think like them, who don't look like them, who don't act like them. And if the issue is present, you need to bring that person in, like a Black person who can speak to those things and answer some of those questions, kind of like this forum, but more it could be a little bit deeper conversation, a tougher conversation based off of your community. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's all I have for it, I guess, at this moment.
Nope, that's been great. It's been great, man. Thank you. Now we're going to open it up. If anybody else would like to, so we're going to do this way. If you're on a computer, you can just hit the space bar. If you want to ask a question. If you don't want to ask one, you can type it in there's a chat there. You can just send it in the chat and we can try to bring it up later. But if, I trust you all won't all rush in here, but does anyone want to ask a question for Javon here? Sarah's got her hand up. Go ahead, Sarah.
First off, I want to introduce myself. My name is Sarah Hobbs. I live here in Portland. I'm not a church plant potential. Thank you, Ron, for inviting me to sit in on this discussion. If I could reach through the computer, Javon, and give you a hug, I would. The past 2 days, I have been having a painful, intense conversation with a bunch of wonderful white people in a conservative church in a suburb of Vancouver, Washington. Great people, but they've just been going on and on and on about everything they think is wrong with Black Lives Matter.
Right.
And I was trying to nudge the person who started this conversation. I understand their anger. They are a retired career Portland police officer. I understand why he's angry. And
Yes.
I reached out to him and said, I acknowledge your anger, but people like myself are trying. Well, finally I got frustrated, and I actually had a good talk before I went to the infusion center with the pastor. And I said, I don't know what to do here. How do we get people to the point of, we know everything we say we disagree with, but I get ignored when I say, okay, we know what we disagree with. How can we start finding a bridge to an agreement? and my comment was ignored while the everything wrong comment kept on going. I don't know what to do anymore. I am
Right.
at a loss. So, and thank you for your comments about the fact that the need to sit down and have these conversations. One of the great things that the pastor at the church commented, social media is not always the best venue. So I'm gonna shut up now, and hopefully if you have any wise words of wisdom of how to lovingly push, though I don't like the word push, but I think you get what I'm trying to
Right.
say. This
Right.
conversation,
No, I get it.
I'd appreciate it.
So just like the years of Black people being marginalized and not feeling heard and not feeling understood and having all this stuff, a lot of people who deal with the issue on the opposite end, they have the same issue. They don't feel like they're being heard. They don't feel like they feel like everything is just one-sided. And I'm not. That's just the way it is. And so a lot of times when you're in these conversations with people, you have to start where they are in that conversation. You can't go into a conversation thinking that you're going to change their mind in an hour. I don't think I've ever done that. I don't think I've ever had a conversation with somebody that's just like, I get boom, 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 I lay out my points and you're good. You have to start where they are. And I think it's super important. And I don't know what the conversation was that you were having with them, but it's important to have questions, ask probing questions. Ask them, what do they think about this? And to be honest with you, when I do it, I usually don't even tell them what my opinion is. I just ask them questions to help, because I want them to formulate their opinion in real time. Now, it might take 7 or 8 conversations with them to get to the point that I want, or they may never get to that point, but it's okay, because my job is to get you to think about it a little bit more. Are you sure that that opinion is correct? Well, what about this? Are you sure that that's how you're supposed to do? Well, what about this? And realize that you may never change their mind, and realize that you might come out of that conversation and be like, okay, they're crazy, but it's okay, because all you're doing is seeking to help them understand, maybe process things a little bit different, because more often than not, what happens is they only hanging around people that think like them and talk like them. They have no other alternative opinion coming through other than what they saw on social media or fixed news, you know? And so the idea that you're going to change their opinion in one moment ain't going to happen. The idea that if you're outnumbered, maybe 5-1, you're the only one in the room like that, you're really not going to change their opinion. And so you just have to keep asking questions to get them to think about it. And again, it might happen over time. And I think that's the most important thing that I want everybody to get out of this conversation, regardless of which way you're trying to do it. This thing ain't gonna happen because you did one event, or you did one thing, or you posted something, or you got it. Like, it's gonna take time. Just like it took time to get where we are, it's gonna take time to heal from where we are. And so that's super important to understand that. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's.
Thanks, Javon. I got one from Jonathan Thomas. Do white people recognize their white power in their life? We seem to think that white power or white privilege is only for extremists. And is it frustrating to expect African Americans to teach us white people? How much education, books, instruction should we seek before we sit down with our brothers, sisters in the Black community? It's in the comments there.
Okay. So let me see if I can find it again. Let me see if I find it, because I want to answer. I want to be, where are the comments at? I think I understand the question. Let me see if I can answer it and tell me if I didn't do it fully. What I think that there's 2 parts to it, right? There's 2 parts. So I think it is your responsibility, because especially if you're trying to seek to bridge that gap as a white person, to recognize not only the plight of the Black community, but also recognize the privilege that you have. Like, I think I told the story. I told the story on Facebook, and maybe I just tell it again so that people can understand. I was in a car with my white friend. She was driving. I was in the passenger seat, and Laura, she was Hispanic, and the other side. We get pulled over by the cop. The cop walks over to the side. He says, "Do you have an identification?" And so my friend, who's driving, by the way, pulls out her wallet, going through. He gets his flashlight, puts it in my face. He said, "Do you have an ID? Did you hear me? Do you have an identification?" And I'm like confused. I'm like, "What? Are you serious? Is he talking to me?" And then he walks to the other side of the vehicle and yells at me, "Get out of the car." I'm freaking out, right? I'm scared. I'm like, "Oh man, something bad gonna happen to you." I told Megan, I was like, "Hey, take off," but we wasn't going nowhere. I was kind of joking, but I was for real because I'm kind of scared. So I get out of the car. He passed me down. "Do you have any weapons or drugs on you?" He basically lectured me about like it's bad to be out as a black dude with white girls in the car and a whole bunch of craziness, nonsense. Now think about what I just said, right? I don't know how many people had that happen to them, but that happened to me. I wasn't driving. I ain't do nothing wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. And so this idea, and that was when I was 16 years old. So this idea that like the white experience is similar to the black experience, sometimes it's not, man. Like I go into a store and I make however much I make as an officer in the Navy, probably more than most of the managers. And I go around certain things and they look at me and they follow me and it's crazy. I've been called the N-word at least 20 times in every state that I've been in by white people. And so it's kind of crazy, man. Like, it's kind of crazy that like some of the stuff that I experienced, it has only to do with the color of my skin. And if you knew me and you met me and you knew who I was, you'd be like, "Man, this dude is one of the coolest, chillest dudes. Like, why people treat him like that?" And it's like, so there is this element of like, I don't know if the right term is white power. I guess people tend to use like white privilege, but then when you do that, people are like, "Well, I grew up poor. I wasn't privileged." But I'm like, that's not what they're talking about, man. They're not talking about just this idea of wealth. They're talking about this idea that when they did the Western expansion over to, Wyoming and all that stuff, the Oregon Trail and all that stuff, Black people weren't included in that. They weren't included in that. So we didn't have no land to go to. So by default, we started all this stuff kind of over, in the 60s. And so there is this element of like people of that are not Black needing to recognize that there is this systematic thing that allows you to be a little bit ahead of the game. It's kind of like when people say, "Well, Donald Trump's dad or grandfather or whoever picked his stuff up by the bootstraps and made $1 million, he did all that stuff," but like whoever else granddad that was Black during that time didn't have the opportunity to do none of that stuff. They weren't allowed to. They weren't even allowed to vote. So why would they be allowed to get a bank loan or do this or do that? They weren't allowed to do it. And so there is this, like, we're like 100 years behind on some cases. And so when people see Michael Jordan and LeBron James, all those people, they're exceptional. Beyonce is exceptional. And so like, it's one of those, like you can look at that and see the famous Black people, but most Black people are not in that situation. Somebody, Jonathan, are you saying something?
I'm Jonathan. So that, my question is also too, I try to approach white people and talk about, we have to, it's that bias, but I use the word of, you have to recognize your white power.
Yes.
And they get all like,
oh, right. I see what you're saying.
I am not that. And they only think of the extremist without understanding that for their whole life, they've had a white privilege. They have had a white power. They have had the 100 years ahead, like you said.
Right.
And so I'm thinking on my side, ask the questions of how do we make clear that just because I tell white people that they have white power or a supremacy, that they don't go off the rail, but they have to recognize it, that we have had that. And I think you bring up a great point there. And in regards to the asking how much, really should we educate ourselves before, is there any struggle of then we say, "Hey, you explain it all to me." Because to me, then that's one more time. I turn it around, like I turn it back on me. It's the white power narcissistic frustration. Right. And then it's like, it's a problem. So you should help me fix my problem. And if you can't, well.
Oh, well,
so that's,
right.
How much should we really, encourage, white communities, do your homework, first and then sit down a little bit more prepared. Some of those recent and past court cases, hey, take a look first and
Right.
know a little bit, and let's have a conversation. So that's kind of where
Right.
it's coming from.
Exactly. And I agree with you. I agree with this idea that you educate yourself first. And that way, again, like I was saying, you coming out of your knowledge base, but also then when you go into these situations where you do say that to people, hey, you have kind of this white privilege, this white power, and they're like, no, I don't. What do you mean? And they get all crazy. Then you could be like, well, what about this? Did you know that this happened? Did you know that this happened in this country? And then when they say, oh, that happened a long time ago, well, did you know that this happened around this time? Did you know that the incarceration rate for a black person on certain crimes were higher? Like people had the same exact crime, yet black people were getting convicted at a higher rate. I mean, convicted longer, excuse me. So if they get 3 years for the same crime, this guy got 15 years simply because he was African American. That is systematic stuff.
Thank you. Thank you, Javon. Oh.
And then go somewhere and see the difference.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry about that.
You're okay. So I got a question from Caleb Borchers on your chat's probably blinking. So that means I sent you this question.
Okay.
Caleb Borchers. So he says it's a systematic one. Apparently, we aren't discussing race enough in our churches, at least in our predominantly white churches. Do you have any thoughts on how we can inject this better into our systems? Thinking of kids' education, youth groups, more intentionally part of our preaching.
I think that's a tough one to answer because you're again, one of the most segregated days is Sunday, right? And so this idea that you're gonna talk about race without that race being present is gonna be tough. Yeah, I don't know. Like I don't know. I'm trying to think through that question because it's a great question. I think that's something that we should try to navigate through more and bridge that gap. Now, I'm not saying every church does have diversity in it, because I went to a church in North County where we had a lot of Hispanics, a lot of white people, and a few black people. So it was super diverse in that way based off of the culture. But I think if you're going to do that, you have to know, you have to know what you're talking about. You have to be able to have the right attitude, but I think you need to bring people in and have them preach if they're black or from the black experience. Say, hey, this is what we're going to talk about this Sunday, and maybe have a Q&A on a Sunday morning with people, and then just do different I don't want to say service projects, because I don't want you to treat black people like we got to do like a charity case or something, but like it's more about being present with and being involved in the community that they live in. I don't know how to answer that question because it's so dynamic. Yeah. Because you never know where your church sits. Some churches, like where we were with North County, there weren't that many black people in general, so it's kind of hard to bridge that gap. So you had to bridge the Hispanic white gap, and so I guess it just depends on your demographic of your church. And then if you're going to do that, make sure you're doing it and you know what you're talking about, and you bring people who are black pastors, and maybe even like I said, the most segregated day is Sunday. Say, hey, we're going to have a joint service with this black church, and he's going to share, she's going to share. Just thinking outside the box. I don't know how to answer your question. I think that's something that you can have a whole nother meeting on, if that makes sense. I'm sorry if I'm not answering that correctly. Who asked that question? Who asked that question?
Caleb Borchers.
I don't know. Did you have anything to clarify on that, or did I kind of answer it a little bit? Or
no, I mean it's helpful. I just, we talk about like being on social media, and you see people being idiots in the comment section, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And to me, it just shows systemic failure. Like it just shows you that we have thousands of churches that are not doing enough to train tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Christians. And so, like, to me, it's just an indictment that it's clearly something that's important that we haven't found a way to bring into our church systems. And so I'm just curious, I was just curious if you had any thoughts. it just, I don't know. I was reading about Sesame Street this week, and like
Hmm.
Sesame Street did all these fascinating things to,
Right.
particularly sort of center children who were, from Black backgrounds or Hispanic or whatever, to make
Right.
them the central part of their story, and that's fundamentally changed the way people at a certain age think about race because they were taught it different in Sesame Street.
Right.
And I'm just thinking, like, if Sesame Street can do that, should be able to put that into some of our kids' curriculum. Like, should be able to
Yeah,
figure some of that stuff out.
right. I agree. No, that's a good point. I agree. I think it's very much what you said. Like, I agree with you 100%. You can figure out ways to do it, and I think it just depends on the church and how they take certain things. Some churches you have to go a little bit slower with than other churches, so it just depends on where they are collectively. Because you can't just be like, all right, cool, now we just got a whole bunch of Black stuff going on, Black this, Black that. They're like, like that, go crazy. Like, what do you mean? Why are we doing this stuff? And so, like, I think you just have to go slowly and figure out based off of your congregation. I agree. I think it's going to be, the reason why it's hard to answer your question is because it's going to be unique to each church, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Any other questions? Here, I don't have any in the comments. Any other,
Can I just make a comment, Ron?
Yes, Leah, good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Ironically, the first time I heard the term I see you and I hear you was from Javon and his now wife, Leah. I'm sure they don't remember this because it was just a little bit of their everyday life, but to me it was a big deal. And what is this, 15, 20 years later, I think of it all the time, so thank you. But I remember, I know Javon from college and his wife, and I was sitting in the JC doing some work, probably stressed out, and the two of them, I barely knew them at the time, they came over and brought me this note and just handed it to me and just like patted me on the back and said, "You have a good day," and they walked away, and I'm like, what on earth is this? I opened the note and it just said, "We know you've been having a hard time lately. We know you can do this." Just very encouraging. And they said, "We see you and we know what you're going through." And I'm like, people see me? Like, it was such a profound thought to me that other people can notice what it is you're going through, and they had nothing to do with me at the time. I don't think we even had any classes together, but it's just we can tell by watching what you're going through that this is hard for you and you needed some support and some encouragement. And that's the, I don't want to say buzzword to bring down any of the importance of it, but you do hear that so much lately. We see you, we hear you, we're here. And I think that's just such a profound thing. Just let those people in your life that, especially the people of color right now, know that we're hearing you, and not all of us are those other people. I'm not even sure what I'm saying right now, but that was just so profound to me. And thank you again. Literally 20 years later, I still think of that all the time. And I would imagine that saying that and meaning it to people who are struggling right now has to mean a lot, as long as that I knew you were genuine. You didn't just say it and be like, peace out, deal with your struggle,
Yes, I would love to take credit for it, but I'm telling you that was mostly my wife with that thing, and she's amazing. She always does
that. Is okay.
Yeah, and, I'm along for the ride in some cases when it comes to that stuff. But like,
sorry, go ahead.
No, but I agree with you. What you're saying is this idea of like being seen, and if we want to learn a lot of things, we need to take our cue from Jesus, right? Jesus goes to the well and he sees that woman. She's like, "Why are you talking to me? What are you talking to me for?" That's how people should look. Like, why? Black people are like, why are you talking to me? Like, why are you bringing this issue up? It's important to you. It hasn't been important to you or your people for 200 years, 300 years. Why are you talking to me? And so, like, and he did that. He saw her and he heard her to the point where she said, all right, I can see you a prophet, right? Like, because that's how it should be. Like, we talking, we saying that thing, and people should be like, all right, I can see you on my side. So let me ask you a question then. And now all of a sudden you're bridging this gap that you didn't know you could bridge.
Up for everybody.
Open it all up, all because you saw them and you heard them. And it's super important that you say that. I agree with that 100%.
Thank you.
Man, thank you. Wonderful. Any other questions? I see a comment from John I was going to read at the end, Jonathan. But any other questions? Anybody have? Well, let me ask you this one. Yeah, I want to try this here. Javon, I wanted you to tell me what you think of this here. Let's see if we can do this. So you can read that, right?
Yes.
So this, I really enjoyed Why We Can't Wait by Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh, yes, exactly.
Worth reading for anybody, everybody. But he makes this, we hear often about the social gospel. Well, those are social.
Mm-hmm.
Like what he says, in the midst of blatant injustices inflicted upon the Negro, that's his word. I have watched white churchmen stand on the sideline and mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctified trivialities in the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice. I've heard many ministers say those are social issues with which the gospel has no real concern. And I've watched many churches commit themselves to a completely otherworldly religion, which makes a strange, unbiblical distinction between body and soul, between the sacred and the secular. And I think about, Billy Graham, who, well, I just want to preach the gospel, and Martin Luther King Jr. wanted him to talk about racism, and I just want to preach the gospel. And what are your thoughts? I hear often, hey, you guys are talking about social issues. We need to talk about the gospel. And here Martin Luther King brings up, well, really, from our perspective, this is the gospel. Do you see that in churches happening as well?
In some cases, yes, I would say yes. I think what happens, I think instead of the word social, it becomes political. Like, that's a political thing. Why are you politicizing this? Why are you making this about politics? I'm like, that's about politics? No, this is about people's lives. This is about real situations. What are you talking about? What do you mean politics? And so, but that's unfortunate, because what happens is, and that's a whole nother conversation, Christian, Republican, all that stuff. That's a whole nother conversation, because a lot of times by default, if you're a Republican and you're a Christian, you just fall along with the Republican idea. So anything that a Republican say or do, you just do it. And now, well, I'm Christian, God, country, and blah, blah, blah. And so by default, there's no distinction between that and what actual Christianity is. There's no distinction. It's just like, oh, I'm Republican, my mom was Republican, and I'm Christian. And it's like, I can tell you that, like, the Republican Party or the Democratic Party don't really, like, mesh that well with all of Christianity. That Christianity is different than both of those parties. Christianity is different than all politics. It is different. And so if you find yourself removing yourself from a Democrat Party, removing yourself from a Republican Party, that's probably a good thing, because that means you're probably following the gospel. And so I think that that's the issue for us today, is this idea that how politics play into it, and how now all of a sudden, if you agree with X, Y, and Z on the political side, that means you're a liberal. If you agree with this, that means you're conservative. And it's like, yo, that ain't got nothing to do with politics. That has everything to do with people's lives and people's humanity. What are you talking about? What do you mean it's political? And I think I see a lot more in our church today. And I think people need to divorce themselves from that. They need to figure out a way to understand what the Republican Party and the Democrat Party really stand for, and put themselves in a position to realize, that doesn't really actually fly with what Christianity is actually teaching us. some of that stuff. Some of it does. Some of it you could be like, well, the Democrats think this and they want to help people, and Christians want to help people, and Republicans think this and they think that we should, all lives should matter with babies and all that. I get it. I get why we pick sides, but we pick sides at the expense of our Christianity, and we end up becoming more Republican than Christian. We are becoming more Democrat than Christian, and that's why we end up making those issues very controversial when they shouldn't be, because it should be. That's wrong. That's wrong for humanity. How is that political? No one's going to say that a murder or a rape is political, but we say it with all this other stuff. It's just weird. It's just interesting. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I see it based off what you said.
I'm going to ask, I got one more question here, and then we'll have to shut her down. Bruce Bates, who's on our Kairos staff, said one of my old professors, Everett Hufford at Harding School of Theology, said, "We won't have a great movement of reconciliation in our churches until a strong white leader and a strong black leader become great friends and model trust and love in the community." Do you have any thoughts on going forward, Javon?
Yeah, yes. So she's just talking about any community is correct, like the community that you live in, correct? I don't know who asked that question.
Yeah, I think that would be.
Yes. Yeah. Right. It wouldn't strong regional leaders or strong national leaders, but it's just addressing that situation that there's just such distrust amongst the system. The segregated Sunday system has been going on so long.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That it's really, actually, its length, its tenure is pretty staggering, and it's so ingrained in both tracks. There's the only places where we have seen that break up are multi-ethnic churches in our large U.S. cities, and actually the International Churches of Christ. For all they weren't perfect, but they did a great job of this issue. So I just, I want to see that changed in my lifetime. And I want to know, do you think he's right about this idea of two strong leaders, black and white, becoming friends could make some meaningful difference?
Yes, I agree. And becoming friends and bridging the two worlds. That doesn't mean we have to worship church together, because everybody has different ways that they worship church. So, you go to black church, some black churches worship this way, and you're like, some white churches worship this way. So it doesn't have to necessarily be that, but it can be, through community service and acts of kindness and things like that, just bridging the two communities together that normally wouldn't hang out with each other or talk to each other. I think one of the other things that can happen too is when we're white and black spaces or black and white spaces calling out injustices when you see them. One of the things that I wish I would have did that earlier when I was first a minister, because I spent a lot of my time as a minister in white churches. And so one of the things that I know is that I was the minority really quickly. And I didn't spend a lot of time in black churches. So I went to this camp, right? The first year I did camp, and they broke all the kids down into the cabins. And in my cabin, I had all the black people and the Mexicans, and I was the black counselor. You could tell that you start seeing people being grouped in certain areas. I'm just like, I didn't say anything about it because I thought it was funny, but I was like, hey, whatever, But then I started thinking about it, like, that was kind of messed up, to be honest with you, because the whole idea of camp is so that you can meet different people and be with different people. And then somebody explained it away. They were like, oh, well, we just want to make sure that everybody was more comfortable. I was like, are you sure about that? You mean were you not sure that you didn't want to make those people uncomfortable by putting a black kid in your cabin, or a black kid in this cabin? Did somebody request that? I don't know. I didn't challenge them on that, but later on, I was like, dang, I should have challenged them on that. And so I think when you see things like that as a white minister in those moments when you're in black spaces and vice versa, that you have to challenge people to say, hey, what's really going on here? Why is this happening? And getting people to think outside of that. But I do agree with you. If you can bridge that gap with a black leader and a white leader, and they put you in opportunities where you can be doing things to Christ-like things together. You don't have to come to have a conversation about Black Lives Matter. Just come to have a conversation about helping the poor, or come feeding people, or I don't know, anything. Just be present with each other. And I think that's super important because it helps people see people as humans instead of distant political thing. I don't know if that answers your questions.
Yeah, it does, because even the example from the camp that you gave reflects that the person that made that decision did not have any friends of color.
Exactly.
And so they didn't even know how to solve that problem the right way.
Nope.
And on Europe, man, we need to play cards together. We need to go to games together. I mean, it's like we don't even have any, it's like, yeah, I want to do those other things too, but man, we can't even do those things yet. It's terrible.
Right, exactly. It's so true. And I think that's super important because it takes everybody's guard down, and then it allows you to have that conversation as a friend instead of opposing opinions, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, thank you guys. This has been a really great time. Javon, I just really appreciate your time. I know it's been on your heart, and I love talking with you again and hearing you. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of wind down, and then I'm going to have you lead us in prayer as we close out. One thing is next, we're going to do this for the next couple of weeks. So in 2 weeks, we're going to have Carlos Isazige from Luminous City Church in San Diego. We work with him in the Kairos network, and he's going to talk on this. But next Wednesday, sometime Wednesday, Bruce has got a guest who's going to speak as well, and we'll be getting.
Clarence Campbell's going to speak for us. So Caleb, you know him, and he's a local minister here in Rhode Island, and grew up in Virginia, and looking forward to what he has to share.
And we're going to, that might be a little later because he works at Amazon till later. So we'll just check on the Kairos chats, and we'll have this recorded on YouTube. And before John prays, I want to share with what Jonathan Thomas to the other pastors here. Are we willing to let the next generation live this out, or will we try to rush through it and find generation and have generations continue to struggle? I hope I'm willing to take the time building this, knowing I might never see it in my lifetime. I'd like to, but I'm old.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good comment. I like that. Yes,
brother. And man, we just hope we continue to have a great relationship. And but thank you for sharing your heart, and look forward to more.
Oh yes. Well, thank you. Thank you everybody for being here too. I appreciate it. Appreciate your willingness to want to learn and be present with and during this time. So that's pretty good.
All right. Go ahead and close this out, and we'll hit the recording, and my head's getting sunburned here. So.
All right. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for allowing us to be in your presence and come just to be able to listen to one another. God, there's so much pain and suffering and things in the world. And right now we are dealing with a situation that unfortunately has been happening since the foundation of this country, God. And I pray that my brothers and sisters who came here today find a way to bridge that gap between race and opinions, God. Thank you so much for their hearts. Thank you so much for their minds. Thank you so much for their willingness to just be a part of the conversation. That's just the first step. But I pray, God, that regardless of what happens to them, what happens about their opinion, if they lose friends, God, I pray that they stay the course, that they do what is right despite what's happening to them. Because I think a lot of people are scared. We're scared on one end as Black people. And a lot of people, white people, are scared because they don't know what to say or what to do. And they're afraid that if they do something or say something, they're going to do it the wrong way. God, I know you have a spirit, the Holy Spirit, which your Son has left us. And I pray that any decision or anything that we decide to do is just guided by your Holy Spirit, that we tap into that. That once we tap into that, it doesn't really matter what our opinions are. We're just going to do what the Spirit leads us to do, and the Spirit will lead us to do things that are right and holy. I know this for a fact. God, you're an amazing God and worthy to be praised. And we pray all this in Jesus' most holy name. Amen.
Hey, thank you for the invite, Ron.